Ambassador Sarah Chen stepped off the transport shuttle onto the crystalline platform of the Galactic Council Station. The massive structure floated in the void between star systems, a neutral zone where the 12 dominant species of the galaxy gathered to maintain peace. Sarah had spent 3 years preparing for this moment, learning the intricate protocols and customs of each alien race that held power in this corner of the universe. The Zephyrians greeted her with their traditional wing flutter, their bird-like features showing what she hoped was approval. The Crithari delegation remained stoic behind their ceremonial masks, while the aquatic Delphinians observed from their mobile water chambers. Sarah had memorized every gesture, every cultural nuance that might help humanity finally gain a seat at the council table. For 2 centuries, humans had been petitioning for membership. Earth's growing influence in trade routes and their remarkable adaptability had caught the attention of several council species. But the application process remained deliberately slow and bureaucratic. Sarah represented humanity's best hope for recognition as equals among the stars. The first week of negotiations went smoothly. Sarah presented Earth's technological contributions, their peaceful expansion policies, and their willingness to abide by galactic law. The Zephyrians seemed genuinely interested in human agricultural techniques, while the silicon-based crystallites appreciated humanity's engineering solutions. Even the notoriously difficult Vorthak showed signs of warming to the proposal. But the hegemony delegation remained hostile throughout every session. The hegemony controlled the largest military force in the galaxy, and their representative, Supreme Commander Thex, made no secret of his disdain for the primitive mammals from Sol 3. During public sessions, Thex would interrupt Sarah's presentations with dismissive gestures, claiming that humans were too young a species to understand galactic politics. Sarah maintained her diplomatic composure despite the provocations. She had trained for this, understanding that some species viewed humanity as upstart newcomers, threatening the established order. The hegemony had held dominant military power for over a millennium, and they clearly saw Earth's rapid technological advancement as a potential challenge to their authority. The turning point came during the 8th day of negotiations. Sarah was presenting humanity's proposal for a new trade agreement that would benefit smaller member worlds when Thex stood abruptly. His reptilian features twisted with rage as he accused humans of deliberately undermining hegemony interests. The accusation was absurd, but Sarah could see that several delegations were taking it seriously. "The mammals seek to corrupt our sacred order," Thex hissed, his translator rendering his words in the common galactic language. "They spread like a plague, contaminating every system they touch with their chaotic influence." Sarah rose calmly, her voice steady as she addressed the assembled delegates. "Honored representatives, humanity seeks only peaceful cooperation and mutual benefit. Our proposals have been reviewed by independent analysts and found to comply with all galactic regulations." But Thex was not finished. He produced a data crystal, claiming it contained evidence of human espionage activities within Council space. The evidence was clearly fabricated, but the hegemony's influence ran deep within the Council structure. Sarah watched in growing alarm as species that had seemed supportive began to distance themselves from the human delegation. The Crithari voted first, their masked faces unreadable, as they declared humanity unsuitable for Council membership at this time. The Delphinians followed suit, their aquatic forms seeming to ripple with regret, but their vote unchanged. One by one, the delegations that had shown interest in human membership withdrew their support. When the final vote was tallied, only the Zephyrians and 2 smaller species had voted in favor of humanity. It was a crushing defeat, but Sarah knew that diplomacy often required patience. She began preparing for the long journey home, planning how to rebuild support for future negotiations. She never got the chance to leave. That night, as Sarah worked late in her assigned quarters reviewing the day's proceedings, hegemony security forces breached her door. They claimed to have found additional evidence of human espionage, though they provided no opportunity for Sarah to examine or refute their accusations. The arrest was swift and violent, with Sarah barely managing to send an encrypted message to Earth before her communications were severed. The trial that followed was a mockery of justice. Sarah was denied legal representation, forbidden from presenting evidence in her defense, and subjected to interrogation techniques that pushed the boundaries of galactic law. The hegemony prosecutors painted her as the leader of a vast human conspiracy to destabilize the Council, using the fabricated evidence as proof of humanity's inherent duplicity. Most damning of all, several Council species that had initially supported humanity's membership bid remained silent during the proceedings. The Zephyrians protested the treatment of the human ambassador, but their voices were drowned out by hegemony propaganda and the cowardice of species who feared economic or military retaliation. Sarah maintained her innocence throughout the ordeal, her dignity intact even as the charges mounted against her. She knew that this trial was never about evidence or justice. It was about sending a message to humanity and any other species that might challenge the established order. The hegemony wanted to demonstrate the price of ambition, the cost of reaching beyond one's assigned place in their carefully maintained hierarchy. On the final day of the trial, Sarah stood before the assembled council one last time. The charges against her were treason, espionage, and conspiracy to undermine galactic security. The prescribed punishment was death by neural disruption, a quick but irreversible process that would serve as both execution and warning. As the sentence was read, Sarah looked directly at the camera feeds that would carry news of this moment across the galaxy. She knew that humanity was watching, waiting to see how their representative would face this ultimate test. Her final words were not a plea for mercy or a protest of innocence, but a simple message of hope. "My death will not be the end," she said, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. "Humanity will remember this day, and we will remember who stood with justice and who chose to look away. My death," and ensued. "My death will not be the end." The execution was carried out immediately, broadcast live across Council space as a demonstration of their swift justice. Sarah Chen, Earth's first ambassador to the Galactic Council, died with her head held high, never knowing that her death would ignite a war that would reshape the galaxy forever. The news of Ambassador Chen's execution reached Earth exactly 47 hours after her death. Admiral Marcus Webb stood in the war room deep beneath Geneva, watching the recorded footage of humanity's first diplomat being murdered in front of the entire galaxy. The silence in the room was deafening as the assembled military leaders absorbed the implications of what they had just witnessed. President Elena Vasquez broke the silence first, her voice tight with controlled fury. "They didn't just kill our ambassador. They made it a spectacle. A warning to every species in the galaxy about what happens when you challenge their authority." Webb had served in 3 colonial wars and seen his share of atrocities. But this was different. This was a calculated insult, designed to humiliate humanity and demonstrate the Council's power over lesser species. The footage showed clearly that most Council members had simply watched in silence as an innocent woman was executed for crimes she never committed. "What are our options?" the president asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. General Harrison, head of the Colonial Defense Force, pulled up holographic displays showing human military assets across the galaxy. "We have 47 fully operational battle groups spread across 23 star systems. Our newest ships incorporate technology that the Council hasn't seen before. But their combined fleets outnumber us 15 to 1. "Numbers aren't everything," Admiral Chen interjected. She was Sarah's younger sister, promoted to fleet command just months before the diplomatic mission began. "Our ships are faster, our weapons more accurate, and our crews are motivated by something the Council species haven't felt in centuries." Righteous anger. Webb studied the tactical displays, his mind already working through possible strategies. Humanity had been building its military in secret for decades, knowing that eventual conflict with the established galactic powers was inevitable. They had learned from studying Council warfare tactics, identifying weaknesses in their rigid command structures and overconfident battle doctrines. "The Council thinks we're primitive," Webb said finally. "They see us as young mammals who got lucky with some advanced technology. They've never faced human warfare tactics, never experienced what happens when you push our species too far." The president nodded grimly. "Admiral Webb, I'm authorizing Operation Retribution. You have complete tactical authority to respond to this act of war as you see fit. The only restriction is that civilian populations are to be protected whenever possible. Webb felt the weight of history settling on his shoulders. Humanity had tried diplomacy and been answered with murder. Now they would discover what humans were truly capable of when their backs were against the wall. The first strike came 3 days later at the Hegemony naval base in the Koreth system. 12 human stealth ships materialized from hyperspace without warning, their new cloaking technology rendering them invisible until they were already inside the base's defensive perimeter. The attack was surgical and devastating, destroying the Hegemony's primary fleet repair facility and eliminating 2 battle groups before vanishing back into hyperspace. The message was clear. Humanity could strike anywhere, anytime, without warning. Supreme Commander Thex's response was predictably brutal. Hegemony forces launched retaliatory strikes against 3 human colonies, targeting civilian infrastructure in clear violation of galactic warfare conventions. The attacks killed thousands of innocent people, but they also served to unite humanity in ways that decades of peaceful expansion never could. Admiral Chen led the counter-response personally, taking her battle group deep into Hegemony space. The Thex had made a critical error by targeting civilians. Now the gloves were off, and humanity would show the galaxy what total war really meant. The Battle of Zerion Station became the stuff of legend. Chen's 12 ships faced a Hegemony force of 60 vessels, defending their major communications hub. The numerical disadvantage should have been insurmountable, but human tactics proved devastatingly effective. Using coordinated micro-jumps and precision targeting, the human fleet systematically dismantled the Hegemony formation, while taking minimal casualties. The key was human unpredictability. Council species had been fighting the same way for millennia, following established patterns and protocols that prioritized honor and tradition over effectiveness. Humans fought to win, adapting their tactics in real time and exploiting every weakness they could find. When Zerion Station fell, it sent shockwaves throughout Council space. The mighty Hegemony, rulers of the galaxy's largest military force, had been humiliated by a species they considered primitive. Worse, the humans had broadcast the entire battle across the galaxy, ensuring that every species witnessed the Hegemony's defeat. The political ramifications were immediate. The Zephyrians, who had supported humanity's council membership bid, formally declared neutrality in the conflict. Several smaller species that had remained silent during Sarah's trial suddenly found their voices, condemning the execution and calling for investigations into council corruption. But the Hegemony was far from finished. Thex marshaled every military asset at his disposal, calling in favors from allied species and demanding that the Council formally declare humanity a galactic threat. The Crothari and Delphinians, despite their private misgivings about Sarah's execution, voted to support military action against human space. What followed was 3 months of the most intense warfare the galaxy had seen in over 1,000 years. Human forces struck deep into Council territory, targeting military installations and infrastructure, while carefully avoiding civilian casualties. The strategy was designed to demonstrate humanity's military capability, while maintaining the moral high ground that the Council had abandoned when they executed an innocent diplomat. The turning point came when Admiral Webb himself led a massive assault on the Council station where Sarah had died. The symbolic value of the target was immense, but more importantly, the station served as the central command hub for Council military operations. Its capture would effectively paralyze their ability to coordinate fleet movements. The battle was fierce, with Council forces throwing everything they had at the human fleet. But Webb had learned from every previous engagement, incorporating new tactics and technologies that kept the enemy off balance. When human Marines finally breached the station's central chamber, they found the same platform where Sarah Chen had been executed. Webb stood in that chamber, looking at the spot where humanity's first ambassador had died, and made a decision that would echo throughout history. Instead of destroying the station, he would use it to deliver a message to the galaxy. Humanity had proven they could fight and win against overwhelming odds. Now, it was time to show they could also be merciful to those who recognized their mistake. The broadcast went out on all council frequencies, transmitted from the very chamber where Sarah Chen had been murdered. Admiral Webb's words were simple, but carried the weight of human conviction behind them. The Galactic Council executed an innocent woman to send a message about power and dominance. Today, humanity sends our own message. We are not the primitive species you thought we were. We are not helpless victims of your arrogance. We are humans, and we remember our dead. The war was far from over, but the balance of power in the galaxy had shifted forever. Humanity had announced their arrival on the galactic stage not with diplomatic pleasantries, but with the thunder of weapons and the fury of a species that refused to be intimidated. 2 years after Ambassador Sarah Chen's execution, the galaxy had become unrecognizable. What had begun as a localized conflict between humanity and the hegemony had evolved into a complete restructuring of galactic power. Admiral Webb stood on the bridge of the Terran flagship Retribution, watching as the last hegemony stronghold surrendered to the combined human Zephyrian fleet. The Zephyrians had been the first to switch sides, their natural sense of justice overcoming their fear of hegemony retaliation. When Supreme Commander Thex had ordered orbital bombardments of civilian populations in Zephyrian space, threatening genocide if they continued supporting humanity, the bird-like species had made their choice clear. They would rather die free than live under the boot of tyrants. Their courage had inspired others. The crystallites, whose silicon-based physiology made them natural engineers, had quietly begun sharing technological secrets with human forces. Their advanced shield generators and energy weapons had proven decisive in several key battles. Even some factions within the Crathari and Delphinian governments had begun questioning their allegiance to the Council's increasingly desperate tactics. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Sarah Chen's former diplomatic advisor, now served as humanity's chief negotiator with emerging resistance movements throughout Council space. Her office aboard the Retribution had become the unofficial headquarters for what the propaganda networks called the Chaos Coalition, but which Elena preferred to think of as the Free Species Alliance. "Admiral," Elena reported as she entered the bridge, "we're receiving surrender proposals from 17 more hegemony systems. They're offering complete demilitarization in exchange for autonomous governance under human protection." Webb nodded grimly. Victory had come faster than anyone expected, but the cost had been enormous. Millions of beings across dozens of worlds had died in a war that should never have happened. The worst part was knowing that all of it could have been prevented if the Council had simply honored their own laws and given Sarah Chen a fair trial. "What about the hegemony homeworld?" Webb asked. "Thex is still holding out, but his support base is crumbling. Intelligence reports suggest that several of his own generals are considering a coup. They've seen what happened to every other system that chose to fight rather than negotiate. The human strategy had been brilliantly simple in its execution. Rather than attempting to conquer and occupy enemy territory, they had focused on demonstrating the futility of resistance while offering generous terms to those who surrendered. Systems that yielded quickly were granted immediate autonomy and protection. Those that fought were defeated swiftly, and then offered the same terms, proving that resistance only brought unnecessary suffering. It was a psychological approach that the Council species, with their rigid hierarchies and honor-based military traditions, had no defense against. Humans fought like no other species in the galaxy, combining ruthless efficiency with unexpected mercy in ways that confused and demoralized their enemies. Captain Torres, Webb's tactical officer, reported incoming communications from the Outer Rim. "Sir, we're getting reports of spontaneous uprisings in Delphinian space. Their civilian government is demanding the military's withdrawal from human systems and the prosecution of their council representatives for war crimes." Webb felt a grim satisfaction at the news. The Delphinians had been among the most cowardly during Sarah's trial, remaining silent even when they knew the charges were fabricated. Now their own people were holding them accountable for their complicity in murder. The real breakthrough had come 6 months earlier, when human intelligence operatives had infiltrated the Council's central archives. The data they recovered proved what everyone suspected, but no one had been able to confirm. The evidence against Sarah Chen had been completely fabricated by hegemony intelligence services, with the full knowledge and cooperation of several council species. Elena had made sure that information reached every media network in the galaxy. The revelation had shattered the council's moral authority and exposed the corruption that had infected the organization for centuries. Species that had remained neutral suddenly found themselves under intense pressure from their own populations to distance themselves from the council's crimes. "Admiral," Elena said quietly, "there's something else. We've received a formal communication from the Zephyrian High Council. They're proposing the establishment of a new galactic organization based on principles of equality and justice. They want humanity to be founding members, alongside any other species willing to renounce the Council's authoritarian structure." Webb considered the proposal carefully. Humanity's military might had won them the war, but building a lasting peace would require more than superior weapons. They needed allies who shared their values and were willing to stand up for justice even when it was difficult. "What would we call this new organization?" he asked. "The Galactic Democratic Alliance," Elena replied. "Every member species would have equal representation, regardless of military power or economic influence. Disputes would be resolved through mediation and fair trials, not political maneuvering and threats of force. It was everything that the old council had pretended to be but never actually was. Webb thought about Sarah Chen, who had believed so strongly in the possibility of peaceful cooperation between species. She had died for that belief. But perhaps her sacrifice would finally make it reality. 3 months later, Supreme Commander Thex died in his bunker on the hegemony homeworld, a victim of his own paranoia and the poison administered by his former allies. His death marked the effective end of organized resistance to human demands, though scattered groups of fanatics would continue fighting for years to come. The formal signing of the Galactic Democratic Alliance Charter took place on Earth, in the same chamber where the United Nations had once debated humanity's future among the stars. Representatives from 47 species gathered to establish a new framework for interstellar relations based on mutual respect and shared governance. Admiral Webb stood at the ceremony, wearing his dress uniform and thinking about the woman whose death had made this moment possible. Sarah Chen had sought to join an organization that claimed to represent justice and equality, but had found only corruption and murder. Her execution had revealed the Council's true nature and provided the moral justification for everything that followed. Elena approached him as the signing ceremony concluded, carrying a data pad with the latest intelligence reports. "The hegemony remnants have formally surrendered," she announced. "Their new government has agreed to pay reparations for war damages and submit to alliance oversight for the next 50 years. Webb nodded, feeling the weight of 2 years of warfare finally beginning to lift from his shoulders. "And the other council species? Most have applied for alliance membership under the new charter. Those that haven't are maintaining strict neutrality and keeping their military forces within their own borders. I don't think we'll have any more trouble from them." The war that had begun with the execution of one human diplomat had ended with the complete restructuring of galactic civilization. The old council's authoritarian system had been replaced by a democratic alliance where justice was based on law rather than military power, where disputes were resolved through negotiation rather than violence. It was the future that Sarah Chen had dreamed of when she first stepped onto that crystalline platform at the council station. She had died believing in the possibility of peaceful cooperation between species, never knowing that her death would be the catalyst that finally made that dream a reality. Admiral Webb looked up at the stars visible through the chamber's transparent dome, thinking about the millions of beings who would live free because one woman had been brave enough to stand up for what was right, even in the face of death. Sarah Chen's execution had been meant to intimidate humanity into submission. Instead, it had unleashed a force that transformed the galaxy forever. The age of council tyranny was over. The age of the Democratic Alliance had begun. And somewhere among those distant stars, the spirit of humanity's first ambassador could finally rest in peace, knowing that justice had prevailed and her death had not been in vain.